Look, we put these two films together because it's not just about humans standing their ground, about women standing their ground, and how much harsher women are treated when they stand their ground. And you see the inequities in different ways, and I think these two films, I think, showcase that. Anastasia, you're in the Ukrainian colors here.
I stand with Ukraine.
Yeah. And since we're all coming from just watching this film right now, what's going through the minds of other Russians that want to speak out that aren't right now?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I think this film is that important right now, just to show you that there are so many people resistant inside Russia, and they face so many troubles and difficulties, and they're really ready to sacrifice. I have many, many friends in prison in Russia, and it's so tough every time, to write letters saying, well, hope everything will be okay, and they are much more optimistic, by the way, in prison than I'm here.
But you had optimism. You got here.
Watching the film, I feel like I was a bit naive that time, because it's too much responsibility for children. When I say that they will never let so many repressions be in Russia, yeah. But I need to be optimistic. If I do not hope, then I won't struggle, I need that hope to keep fighting and to keep resisting the regime.
Sarah, how did you come to tell Anastasia's story?
Sure. So I'm friends with one of the lawyers that worked on Anastasia's story, a woman called Maria Logan, who's a really extraordinary lady. She has law degrees in Russia, the UK, and the US. And she was working on Anastasia's case, and she introduced us. And as soon as I started speaking to Anastasia, we connected very much mother to mother. This is the first film that I've made since becoming a mother myself. And I think that every mother in the world can relate to the choice between how to spend your time. Do you spend your time contributing to the kind of world you want to see your kids grow up in, or do you care for your children domestically? I'm here today having spent 8 days away from my 7-year-old, and I make that choice intentionally because I believe that Anastasia's story is so important, and I was just blown away by her bravery to stand up to the Putin regime is incredibly, incredibly brave.
And Anastasia, you were doing this, at a time when you're risking your own life, just speaking out. And I sometimes don't think, no matter how much you read about it here in America, I assume you fear for your life here.
Everybody, after each screening, people ask me, do you feel safe? I guess nowadays we are not safe because he is a terrorist. And what he's doing, he's threatening people with energy sources, food, with a nuclear weapon. He's killing people. Today, he left like half of Ukraine without electricity. We are sitting here, and many, many children are in complete darkness. And of course, I am afraid. I am afraid for my children who are now in Lithuania. I'm really worried about my friends in Russia, and I know they do not sleep because of this accident in Poland today. But it cannot stop
Let's hope
us.
it was an accident. We were talking.
Yeah. I really hope it was an accident, but who knows? You never know with Putin. So yes, I am afraid, but it doesn't mean that we need to stop talking about it. And I really think that we should treat him as a terrorist, not as a president of my country, because we have never elected. We have no elections, actually.
Ryan and Liz, tell me how you got to know Brittany's story.
I got to know Brittany's story through Liz. So We got our hands on an article in the New Yorker before it came out, right, I think, that Liz had written about Brittany. And I had made a documentary series for Netflix in 2017 called The Keepers, which was a lot about sexual violence against young women in Baltimore in a Catholic school, and have made other documentaries that live in that world. But I'm also from Georgia, and so I'm always deeply interested in stories about Southern culture, and Brittany lives in Alabama right over the Georgia line and Tennessee line. And we read this incredible article that had not come out yet that Liz was writing about Brittany and her Stand Your Ground hearing. And I think you should talk about how you found Brittany, because it's really because of Liz that this story is even out here.
Yes, Liz, how did you come across this story?
So I had started covering stories of women in the criminal justice system and the inequities that they faced when defending themselves. And I saw sort of a news stub about Brittany. It was like a few hundred words in the appeal. And it raised so many questions for me of why she was not being believed, and I wanted to understand exactly what was going on there and exactly what she was up against. So I flew down to Alabama and I met Ramona, Brittany's mom, who you all met in the film, and she's such a powerful advocate for her daughter. And I just kept going back over years and years. And I think these stories, like, you can read just like a news clip about them, like a woman kills her rapist, but then there was so much that brought me back because it intersected with addiction and the criminal justice system and the inequities for women and the Stand Your Ground law and how it's applied, and there were just so many things that I wanted to understand more about.
I'm still trying to figure out the misdemeanor versus the murder charge. I mean, it's just made up law.
You mean why the manslaughter was going to have a
manslaughter.
lot more time than murder?
I mean, it was almost like an obsession with just getting her to cop
Yeah,
the
I
murder
think
charge.
Ryan, let me know what you think, but I think it speaks to like a larger issue of prosecutors just wanting to notch up murder convictions in their counties. We see this all across the United States. I think there's like a larger conversation about prosecutorial misconduct that's happening, and yeah, just really like the desire to get convictions at any cost.
Is this a case, how much of this is small town, not enough attention to the story? Does this happen in Birmingham? Does this happen in Mobile? What do you think?
I think that gets to your previous question. Like, sometimes I often wonder this now, especially that documentaries are becoming more and more popular and commercial and therefore powerful and impactful in a lot of ways. We saw this with The Keepers for sure, that the fact that we made that documentary led to a lot of impact in Baltimore about it. And sometimes I wonder if our documentary had some impact on that, because suddenly these filmmakers who have made a series about Netflix are arriving in this small town, working with an amazing journalist who's already been knocking on doors like crazy. And Brittany was being offered a 25-year plea deal. And we thought that she was the film was supposed to be about Brittany going on a murder trial. That was when we partnered with Liz. She had just lost her Stand Your Ground hearing, and we thought we were going to be making a film or maybe even a series about multiple women going through this. And so when Brittany actually pleaded guilty, it was a very devastating day, but we understand it because she was allowed to take this sentence that was ridiculously reduced for what the crime that she was pleading guilty to was. And so sometimes I do wonder whether us sniffing around, I mean, it was very fun to work with Liz, I have to say, because I've worked with journalists on multiple films, but as a documentary filmmaker, we can be at least I am very, a little reserved, a little non-confrontational, like pulling people in, and Liz will just like go up and knock, like, oh, we're gonna go talk to the police chief.
Good old-fashioned doorstop,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
You
I'm gonna
know
show
about
up.
it.
Yep. Just doorstop. Kick me out.
And it was fun. We would just like sit outside police stations, and everyone that would come out.
Camera. Go ahead, kick me out in front of the camera, right?
And there is a lot of small town politics at play in this story, and You know, I don't think that makes sense, being offered years for manslaughter and
So
then 6 months
you feel
for
like
first-degree
your
murder.
presence may have created
I don't
this
know.
bizarre-
Sometimes
Yeah.
I wonder, and it was more about, like Liz said, like this woman took the murder charge, and I'm sure this is something everyone's wondering about. Where is Brittany now? Because we finished this film over a year ago, and so Brittany already served her sentence and was released from prison, and then she relapsed. And because she has taken a felony charge of murder, every time she makes a mistake now, it's going to be compounded. So she hasn't even seen our film because she was in jail now, a halfway house, and is clean again, and is about to be released 21 days.
Yeah.
Is that right?
For Christmas with her kids.
But it's just that continued cycle of drugs and poverty and this almost irresistible plea deal that she was offered that most likely will add difficulty to the rest of her life.
Sarah, what was the most challenging part of making your film? On the technical front.
I mean, there were a lot of challenges. We were filming at a time in Russia when Putin was consolidating his power in preparation for the war. So he was shutting down opposition politicians. He was cracking down on journalists and activists like Anastasia. Anastasia was being followed by the FSB. So we had a series of protocols in place to keep our team safe and lawyers on standby at every location. And I mean, a lot of our crew risked their freedom to tell this story. Our cinematographer, he'd been in pretrial detention for 100 days for another anti-Putin film that he made. So if he was caught, it was immediate prison time for him as well. And so that was a real challenge, the safety concerns of our crew. Yeah.
How much of your crew basically was doing this under threat of detention?
All of them.
Yeah.
All of them could have gone to jail for making this movie. And a lot of them are out now and living in various countries around the world. And the ones that are left are living in hiding, trying to avoid being pulled off the street and sent to the front line. Men are being ripped from subway stations and given, being told to buy their own bulletproof vests and insanely given tampons to like shove into bullet wounds. Like, this is the level of training and support that they're getting, and they're given a gun that barely works. And and these are men. The men on my crew have spent their lives making anti-Putin movies, and it's a very real threat that they could be just tossed into the front line.
Anastasia, when Putin falls, okay, we're optimists.
I once had a conversation with military men in Russia, and they asked me the same question.
Yeah.
I was really surprised why they
said
asking
when?
me,
Yeah,
actually.
when? Yeah.
They were asking me, like, Nastya, it's my short name, when? And I was like, you are military man.
No. What I mean is when he falls,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
the reaction in the country.
Holiday.
Yeah.
Yeah, it will be a huge, huge holiday. I really believe it. And I'm really waiting for it.
Is his only support those who fear him?
There are a lot of people who fear. And there are a lot of people, what I feel now, what's going on with Ukraine, it's like I'm in the same room, in the same apartment with my sister, and a criminal is beating her, and I'm locked in another room, and I cannot do anything to help her, I just can shout and scream. There is also another option, just to close your ears and
Right.
pretend nothing is going on.
Did you have family members that said, "Hey, why don't you not say anything"?
Sure.
Yeah. What do you
Yeah.
tell them?
Mom was always saying it. It's just like I cannot do any other way. I will lose respect to myself, and I don't want my children to see that kind of me, without self-respect.
Liz, and I'm trying to bounce back and forth here. The more you got to know Brittany, who was the first place that if there was somebody could have intervened and gotten her on a more stable path?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about what this film points out is that the criminal justice system doesn't have answers for a lot of crimes, which often have a lot of complexities to them, and they don't know doesn't know how
The
to
crime
handle
is
them.
the desperation moment,
Yeah,
right?
I mean,
in some ways,
it's
right?
not just about what happened in that moment. Like,
Yeah.
there are a lot of things that led up to it, and I think Ryan made like a really smart choice in including Brittany's addiction, because I think maybe she wouldn't have let Todd over. Like, there were a lot of things that led up to that moment, and even now, like, Brittany relapsed, okay, and she asked the judge, "Can I please go to drug rehabilitation?" And he said no, and he sent her to Tutwiler Prison, one of the most dangerous, if not the most dangerous, prison for women in the United States, which has a culture of sexual assault by guards on prisoners, and that's where he sent her, instead of sending her to drug rehab, and she had relapsed, and she is asking for help. And so I think, like, the biggest thing that I have thought about out of this is just how we can have different outcomes in the criminal legal system when there is a complicated case like Brittany's, and you're trying to understand how we can help people, and even if people just don't want her to reoffend.
Was there anybody in the system that wanted to help her?
We interviewed Sandra Goodman, who was a rape victim advocate. I mean, she was adjacent to the system. She's not in the system, and obviously Brittany had her attorney, but I think, like, prosecutors and judges have a ton of power, and they doubted her from the beginning, I think largely because of her history with addiction. And so they weren't going to believe her.
But this was, I mean, you guys chronicle this, right? How many women have successfully been able to use the stand your ground law as a defense?
Yeah, so I've been looking at that for years, and actually there's very few. No one's really tracking that. But as Ryan included in the film, they're twice as likely to lose their stand your ground cases. And that's true for women and people of color, and consistently it's just white men winning stand your ground cases. So I think there's like a fundamental problem with our self-defense laws that we need to look at.
Anastasia, talk about the underground network that's here in the United States. That, I mean, there's clearly a lot of people living in exile from Putin right now. What's this community like? I mean, I assume it's very supportive.
There are really, really many Russians who left the country. And right now on Times Square, Russians are protesting against war. I wanted to go there, believe me, but I really think that this meeting with you is very important. They keep protesting. But we have this feeling of guilt, that maybe doesn't allow us to sound a bit louder. Because I really feel guilty myself. What's going on there, it's just a nightmare. And reading this news every morning, I still leave, reading all Russian news in the morning. You will just go crazy because Russian propaganda, this is something.
How do you get your news from what's going on inside Russia?
Well, it's easy. There are a lot of Telegram channels and just following. Sometimes I do not want to know news, but I have friends there, and so many friends who are still resistant, and I'm worried about them. And then, my friends are in prison, separated from their children, and there are so many children suffering, as I told you. Imagine my friend Vladimir Karamurza is facing 20 years just protesting against war and also being undesirable, as I am undesirable for Russia. He has 3 children here in the US. I have no idea when he's going to see them. And it's a real torture what Putin is doing. Just for nothing, a very clever, smart man is jailed and separated from his family. And there are so many stories like mine. And there were so many painful moments that are not in the film, but when I start talking about it, I'm ready to cry because for sure I was traumatized by that, and my children were, and we're still crying every time watching the film.
Do you miss pre-Putin Russia?
I don't remember it much. My daughter died when she was 17. And she was born when Putin was president, and she died when he was a president. I gave her birth when I was 21. It was like more than 20 years with Putin. So I guess I miss it, but I don't much remember it.
Sarah, do you think you could give a? I feel. What's Brittany Griner going through right now? I mean, she's at one of these gulags.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have an idea? Do you have an idea of how badly she's being treated, or someone like her would be treated?
I don't really know that much about Brittany Griner's case. I know that she was taken. I don't really know that much about what the conditions
like
are like.
The ones that they supposedly have taken her to when she's.
I assume that that the conditions are pretty horrendous, and that the criminal justice system in Russia is not kind. It's, in the United States, there's so many programs to entertain prisoners, and for all of its flaws, and there are many, so beautifully highlighted in your film. It's a totally different story in Russia. There are very few rights for anybody. Right. So, and she'll be used as a political pawn by Putin for sure. I've heard that they're trying to swap her for an arms dealer called Victor Bout. Yep.
No, there's a whole bunch of people at the FBI that are not happy about that.
Yeah, I bet.
Who spent a lot of time putting that guy away. So, Ryan, how many other Britneys do we think are caught in this system?
Oh boy. Well, originally this project was conceived when Liz wrote this article. We went to Netflix with the idea of making a series about 8 women, and we were researching all of those stories, and Brittany was just going to be one of 8, but she was one of the very few that we thought we could get like a present day unfolding story, because unfortunately so many of these women are living in prison or have been in prison for decades. And so we were researching a lot of these stories, which Liz was helping us find. But we began this film, our very first shoot with Brittany was the first day of March in 2020. And we went and we shot with Brittany. And we got one more shoot with her before she pleaded guilty during the height of COVID. But unfortunately, we were researching all these stories, including an amazing woman in Arkansas named Willie Mae Brown. She's a blind woman who had killed her abusive husband and had been in jail for decades and was finally granted clemency. And it would have been an amazing story to be with her. Her daughter had been fighting forever for her release. And she was released, but it was the summer of 2020. And all of our storylines that we were going to shoot were virtually... You couldn't shoot in any prisons in the summer of 2020. And so it virtually shut down making any of those films, which is where we pivoted because we had shot enough of Brittany's and we knew we could finish the story, especially because Ramona was such an amazing character, even if Brittany pleaded guilty, that we thought, like, well, at the very least, at least we can tell one of these in the hopes that her story can be a symbol for all of the thousands of women who have faced similar circumstances.
Liz, I assume there's some nonprofits that work on trying to get these women released and try to get sort of retried or new evidence. What are some of the more successful groups?
Yeah, the National Clearinghouse for Battered Women has been working on women criminalized for killing their abusers since 1989. And more recently, there's a group called Survived and Punished that's run by Miriam Kaba, who's one of the foremost prison abolitionist advocates today. And so Survived and Punished is another amazing group. And they're chronicling these stories all the time. And unfortunately, now that I'm tracking them, there's one almost every week in the news. And sometimes it gets barely any media attention at all. And sometimes it blows up. And often, as Ryan said, when it gets a lot of attention, then the woman is cleared. But if it doesn't get attention, then that woman often goes to prison, sometimes for the rest of her life.
It's the story of a lot of our society. We just did a story about the Me Too movement, and it's like, if you're famous, you might get some justice. But if you're an anonymous person, you don't necessarily get the same 100%. Justice. Anastasia, when is the Kremlin stormed? When will Russian citizens, do you think, get to the point of saying enough is enough?
That's very difficult.
I mean, he fears people in the streets, doesn't he? That's his greatest fear.
Yeah, and I have many friends who are afraid of just going out because they are following you everywhere. They were following me like in cafes, restaurants, everywhere, outside and inside my apartment as well.
Are they walking around? Are they in cars? I mean, you'd see them. It made it obvious, right? So that you knew they were
Yeah,
watching.
I've seen photos that they've made, and like I'm sitting in a cafe, and they are sitting next to me, just the next table, and making photos. I wasn't aware. It's very difficult to recognize that they are really following me. I have camera installed in the air conditioner in my bedroom. For half of a year, they were filming what's going on before my arrest. I mean, the police was watching us. So of course, people are frightened, and many left. And who are still in Russia, most of them are influenced by propaganda. Very poor families mostly, who are ready to go to war just to get money for that, not realizing that it's actually death. So whenever they ask me that, is a protest possible in Russia, it's very doubtful for me.
Sarah, how cooperative is the U.S. government in getting Anastasia here and helping out these political prisoners?
Yeah, I mean, the US have been amazing. The visa was no problem, and the support that Anastasia receives here is unbelievable. And, you know, so grateful to all of you for being here and for every audience that we've had with this film, and for the $37 billion that Biden signed away today to send more support for Ukraine. You know, I think the US is doing a lot. They're sending a lot of weapons, and of course the reality is that militarily the US could end the war tonight if they wanted to. But I'm very pleased that I'm not making those decisions, because they're tricky.
Who knows what it would escalate to, though?
Exactly. You know, it's a really difficult situation. But I think the US are really doing a lot, and certainly since we've been here, and you know, we've played in Telluride and Toronto and New York, and Anastasia's actually on a world tour at the moment, Israel, Copenhagen. There's a lot going on. But the US audiences are always very engaged and always very much willing to help. And there's actually just two people in the audience that I just want to shout out, because Greg Manichurian and Andy Sabin, who are here tonight, they helped Anastasia's 4-year-old niece, who just survived cancer and who was fleeing bombs in Ukraine. Anastasia and I just started tweeting about this. The story got picked up by the BBC. Greg and Andy saw the story on the BBC, got in contact with us, launched this insane, spontaneous alliance of people from Poland and Germany and Lithuania and America and England to get this little girl her cancer medication, and we did it with like days to spare. So can we just say thank you to Greg and Andy for making that happen? It was so amazing.